In the winter of 1894, when London's breath rose like smoke against the freezing dawn, Duke Alastair Hawthorne discovered the first crack in the world he believed unshakable. The bells of St. Aurelia's Cathedral tolled across the frosted city, calling nobles and gossipers alike to witness a wedding that had already stirred whispers. Alastair, the most powerful man in England's northern provinces, stood at the front of the aisle with the composure of a man carved from stone, unaware that fate had already rewritten his future with quiet, merciless hands. Lydia Fairfax, the overlooked twin, walked toward him with steps that faltered only once, her limp barely visible beneath the heavy silk that had been cut for her sister. Each step was a quiet rebellion against every voice that had ever said she was too plain, too gentle, too breakable for the world into which she was being thrust. The cathedral's chandeliers scattered gold over her pale features, softening the tremor in her hands as she held her bouquet. She felt the stares before she saw them, sharp, assessing, hungry for scandal. The nobles leaned together, lace fans hiding hungry smiles. "That is not the twin he chose," someone whispered. "The beauty is missing." Another voice floated above the murmurs. "He married the wrong sister." Lydia heard every poisoned word, but she kept walking, her eyes fixed on the Duke, who studied her with a gaze she could not decipher. It was not hatred, nor cruelty, but a stunned stillness, as though he was watching a world he trusted shift beneath him. Alastair's jaw tightened, yet he did not step back when she reached him. His voice, when he spoke the vows, was controlled, dutiful, unshakable, touched by a hint of disappointment he could not fully hide. Lydia's own voice trembled on the edges, but held its courage. As she whispered her vows, her heart begged him to believe she had not chosen deceit. She had been placed here, pushed into a carriage that morning with a trembling plea from her mother. "For the sake of our family, you must go." The ceremony proceeded with mechanical grace, but something unspoken pulsed between them. When Alastair lifted her veil, the truth struck him with a quiet violence. This was not Arabella, the vivacious beauty whose portrait he had received. This was Lydia, softer, gentler, wounded by life in ways he had not expected. Her eyes, wide with fear and resolve, held a depth he was unprepared for. Yet the betrayal whispered around them wrapped itself like fog around his thoughts, cooling every instinct to kindness. When the final blessing was given, the applause was thin, brittle, tinged with mockery. Outside, the winter wind carried fragments of laughter from a gathered crowd. Lydia descended the cathedral steps beside him with her chin high, though each breath felt like a blade. Alastair offered his arm with perfect etiquette, but she felt how rigid it was under her hand, as though he feared even a brush of her fingers might shatter his composure. During the carriage ride to Hawthorne Manor, silence unfurled between them, heavy as snowfall. Lydia clasped her hands in her lap, willing them to still. She whispered, "Your Grace, I wish to explain." But he cut her gently, not coldly, with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to disappointment. "There will be time for explanations. For now, let us maintain dignity." His tone was neither cruel nor warm, simply locked behind a wall she did not yet understand. The frozen countryside swept past in silver flashes of trees and distant chimneys. Lydia watched it blur, wishing she could disappear into that pale horizon. She imagined Alastair's mind circling the same thoughts as the rumors outside, that he had been tricked, humiliated, bound to a woman he had not chosen. But when she dared a glance, she found him staring not out the window, but at her reflection in the glass, quietly, intently, studying the shape of her sorrow. The carriage halted before Hawthorne Manor, a grand estate veiled in winter mist. As they stepped inside, servants bowed deeply, though confusion flickered behind their practiced smiles. The great hall glowed with firelight, casting long golden shadows across portraits of past dukes and duchesses. Lydia felt the weight of all those eyes, painted and living, pressing against her. An older retainer approached with hesitant steps, his voice cracking slightly as he bowed to Alastair. "Your Grace, We prepared the bridal chambers as instructed. But his gaze darted to Lydia, uncertain, apologetic. This is not the bride we were expecting. The words dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Lydia's breath caught, pain searing through her as though the sentence had struck her physically. A flush rose to her cheeks, and she lowered her eyes, wishing she could shield herself from the humiliation gathering around her like a storm. Alistair did not answer immediately. His posture stiffened, shoulders sharp beneath his coat, and for a fleeting moment Lydia saw something vulnerable flicker in his expression. Anger not at her, but the unfolding chaos he could not control. He dismissed the servant with a curt nod, but the damage lingered in the air, echoing in Lydia's bones. She stood beside him, spine straight, refusing to break even as her heart twisted painfully in her chest. The manor seemed to inhale around them, waiting. Alistair finally turned to her, his voice low, unreadable. "Duchess, we must speak." Lydia met his gaze with fragile courage, unaware that the conversation awaiting them would reshape the course of their lives and reveal the first truth that neither was prepared to face. In the quiet stretch between them, a distant clock chimed, its solemn notes drifting through the chilled corridor. Lydia steadied her breath, sensing that whatever he revealed next would decide whether this marriage remained a prison or transformed into something neither dared imagine. And as he stepped closer, the air seemed to tremble with unspoken promise tonight. The bridal chamber smelled faintly of roses, though the sweetness felt misplaced, for the room had been arranged for another woman entirely. Lydia paused on the threshold, fingers tightening around the small embroidered handkerchief she carried, a trembling anchor in a world she barely recognized. The wallpaper was a soft blush shade her sister adored, the vanity draped with ribbons that gleamed like captured sunlight, and the bed was adorned with a cascade of silk petals that belonged to Arabella's taste, not hers. Lydia felt like an intruder stepping into someone else's destiny, and the ache of that truth pressed deep into her chest. Alistair remained near the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the candlelit corridor. He did not speak at first, and the silence stretched, taut and fraught with the weight of everything unspoken between them. When he finally stepped farther into the room, his voice was measured, as though he feared that any shift in tone might undo the fragile control he maintained. "This chamber was prepared under certain expectations," he said quietly. "Expectations based on what I had been promised." The words were not cruel, but each syllable felt like a blade skimming her skin. Lydia bowed her head. "I know, Your Grace." His gaze traveled across the room. The perfumes, the ribbons, the opulent arrangements, and something darkened in his expression. Not hatred, not even anger. Rather the dawning realization that he had been caught in a deception orchestrated by those he trusted to uphold honor. Lydia could feel that realization tightening the air around them, and she wished desperately to shield him from the sting of humiliation, though she herself was its cradle. She moved toward the vanity in an attempt to busy her shaking hands. Among the combs and jeweled trinkets lay a delicate hairpin, Arabella's, unmistakably. A slender piece of silver adorned with tiny pearls, elegant and cold. Lydia folded her fingers around it instinctively, hiding it in her palm as if its very presence were a crime. It felt heavy, though it weighed nearly nothing. Alistair noticed the way her shoulders dipped. "Did you know of this arrangement?" he asked, not accusing, but genuinely seeking truth. Lydia drew a shallow breath. "Not until this morning. I was woken before dawn and told I must dress. I tried to resist." Her voice trembled despite her resolve. "But my parents insisted. They said it was better for one of us to secure the alliance than let the contract fall apart entirely." He absorbed her words with a stillness so absolute it unsettled her. She felt him measuring her honesty, her fear, her sincerity. Then, with a soft exhale, he turned away and walked to the window, staring into the winter-dark gardens. Snowflakes drifted past the glass, slow and deliberate, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Outside, the first rumors had already begun to unfurl their cruel wings. Servants whispered in alcoves, footmen traded glances, and somewhere in London, gossip sheets were likely being inked with embellished accounts. The Duke who married the wrong sister. The quiet twin thrust into a title she did not deserve. Lydia imagined the laughter, the pity, the disdain. The humiliation pressed against her like a tightening corset. With trembling resolve, she reached for the lamp beside the vanity and adjusted its wick. The soft light warmed the room, but the gesture did little to soften the ache inside her. "I did not wish to deceive you," she murmured, "nor did I wish to take my sister's place." Alistair looked over his shoulder at her. In the dim glow, his expression was unreadable, his eyes reflecting flickers of firelight like molten amber. Something softened there, something careful, like a man realizing the extent of another's suffering. He crossed the room slowly, stopping a respectful distance from her. "You're not to blame for what others have done," he said, "but the consequences remain. For both of us." He paused, the next words difficult. "England will expect an explanation." The truth of that landed like cold water. Lydia's throat tightened. She had never sought attention, never courted admiration as Arabella had. She had lived in the gentle, quiet corners of life. Now she was thrust under society's harshest scrutiny. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. A footman entered, bowing low, presenting a silver tray stacked with letters. "Your Grace," he said, voice quivering. "These arrived for you." Alistair took the top envelope and dismissed the servant. His brows knit as he read the first note. Then another. His frown deepened. Lydia's pulse quickened. Finally, he lifted his gaze to her. "They urge me to annul the marriage," he said softly. "Some plead, some threaten, some offer political counsel thinly disguised as concern." Lydia's breath faltered, a soft, sharp sound in the stillness. "Do you intend to?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied her as though he were trying to reconcile the image of the woman before him with the chaos spiraling outside these walls. "You are here now," he said finally, "and I will not make decisions in haste." Relief flickered through her like the first warmth at the edge of frost, though she dared not breathe fully. She moved toward the hearth, kneading its glow, and her gaze fell on the silver hairpin still clutched in her palm. She set it onto the mantel with trembling care, as though laying down a piece of her past. Later, seeking solace, she ventured into the servants' wing. A young maid lay feverish on a cot, her mother weeping beside her. Without hesitation, Lydia knelt, smoothing the girl's damp curls, murmuring gentle reassurances. She prepared cool cloths, fetched broth, whispered comfort. Her hands, though small, carried a quiet steadiness born of a lifetime of tending to wounds unseen. Unbeknownst to her, Alistair stood in the hallway shadows, watching her with an expression that no court painter could have captured. The first flicker of respect mingled with something softer, something dangerously akin to tenderness. He had expected a timid shadow of Arabella. Instead, he saw a quiet strength woven through every motion. When Lydia finally rose, exhaustion softening her features, she sensed his presence and turned. Their eyes met in the dim hallway, something shifting between them with the delicate inevitability of falling snow. "You should rest," he said, voice low. She nodded, but before she could speak, a footman approached breathlessly, a sealed invitation trembling in his hand. "Your Graces, the first ball of the season requests your attendance." The note says, he hesitated, ashamed. "It says you may bring whichever twin you intended to wed." Alistair's jaw hardened, fury flashing behind his calm. Lydia lowered her gaze, humiliation burning hot. The Duke's voice, when it came, was quiet steel. "As my Duchess," he said, "you will not hide." And in that single sentence, the world around her shifted once more. They entered the ballroom, their footsteps swallowed by velvet carpets and expectation. Lydia felt the weight of 100 gazes settle upon her shoulders before a single face came into focus. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, scattering light across silk gowns and jeweled collars. Yet the air itself felt sharp, honed by curiosity. She knew, with an aching certainty, that this room had already decided her worth. The invitation had not asked her name. It had questioned her right to exist. Her breath tightened, counting each second like a verdict passed, without appeal that felt final. Alistair walked beside her, immaculate in black, the cut of his coat commanding silence even before his presence was noticed. Murmurs rippled outward, fans pausing mid-flutter, eyes sharpening with anticipation. Lydia felt his arm offer itself, formal and steady, and she accepted, knowing refusal would feed the spectacle. As they moved forward, she sensed the comparison forming instantly, her figure weighed against a sister absent yet omnipresent. Every step echoed with unspoken questions, each footfall daring her to falter. He walked with duty alone, yet his silence felt louder than any spoken judgment cast upon her trembling resolve tonight alone. Arabella appeared across the room like a living flame, laughter bright, posture flawless, every curl arranged to invite admiration. Heads turned instinctively, relief and delight mixing as though order had been restored. Lydia felt the wound open cleanly then, not from envy but from familiarity, from knowing she had always stood in that shadow. Alistair noticed the shift, the way attention abandoned his wife without apology, and something sharp stirred behind his ribs. He had expected humiliation for himself, not this quiet theft of her dignity. It unsettled him, dangerously so, beneath practiced restraint and inherited pride of his name. The dance began without them. Music swelled, couples spun, and Lydia stood anchored beside a pillar, hands folded, spine straight. When a gentleman laughed too loudly near her shoulder, murmuring about substitutions and bargains, the words cut deeper than insult alone. Alistair heard it. He turned with frightening calm, his gaze fixing the offender until color drained from the man's face. "Mind your tongue," the Duke said quietly. "She is twice the woman you will ever meet." Silence followed, thick and stunned, as though the room itself had been struck. Lydia inhaled, shaken by the defense she never expected tonight. Overwhelmed, Lydia fled to the terrace, night air burning her lungs with cold clarity. Snow drifted down in fragile spirals, softening the edges of everything. She gripped the stone balustrade, forcing her breath steady, forcing tears back into obedience. Moments later, Alistair followed, placing his coat around her shoulders without ceremony. The warmth startled her. "I know you never wished for me," she whispered, voice breaking at last. "But I never wished to shame you." The confession hung between them, delicate as frost, impossible to reclaim once spoken. Alistair studied her, seeing courage where he had expected deception and regret. He did not touch her then. Instead, he said softly, "You have never shamed me." The words loosened something locked inside her chest, a fragile release she did not yet trust. Snow gathered on his dark hair as he watched her with new focus, as though the world had shifted by a degree he could no longer ignore. His hand hovered near hers, gloved fingers almost brushing skin, restraint battling impulse in the frozen air. For a heartbeat, the future balanced there, trembling, undecided, aching to fall. Then a door creaked behind them, breaking the spell without mercy or warning. Arabella stood framed in light, her smile sharp as glass, eyes glittering with triumph. She inclined her head, feigning grace, yet her gaze fixed possessively on Alistair. "Sister," she said sweetly, "you always did have a talent for appearing where you were least expected." Lydia stiffened, humiliation threatening anew. Alistair stepped subtly closer to his wife, a silent barrier forming, though his face remained composed, unreadable, dangerous. In that instant, Lydia realized the battle ahead was not merely public, but painfully intimate. Arabella watched them both, calculating, already shaping scandal into weaponry with practiced cruelty and elegant restraint tonight still. Without another word, Arabella withdrew, her laughter echoing faintly as she disappeared into warmth and music. Lydia's hands shook now, the strength she had summoned thinning under exhaustion. Alistair exhaled slowly, as though only now aware of the tension coiled within him. "You need not face her alone," he said. The promise was quiet, unadorned, yet it settled around Lydia like armor she had never worn before. She nodded, unsure whether hope was wisdom or folly, but unable to deny its pull. Somewhere inside, fear and gratitude collided, reshaping the contours of her fragile resolve and growing courage tonight, silently. They returned inside together, whispers trailing them like smoke. Lydia felt changed, though nothing tangible had altered. The room still judged, still measured, yet Alistair's presence now felt different, no longer distant but deliberate. When he offered his arm again, she took it without hesitation. The music resumed, and though they did not dance, something unspoken moved between them, steady, awakening. Eyes followed them, uncertain now, curiosity replacing certainty as the narrative subtly shifted. Lydia lifted her chin, feeling dignity stir where shame had once ruled, fragile but unmistakably alive, breathing in measured defiance and quiet endurance alone, still standing. Later, as midnight thinned the crowd, Lydia stood once more at the window, watching snow erase footprints in the garden below. Alistair approached, his reflection joining hers in the glass. "I wish," he said quietly, "that I had met you first." The word struck deeper than any insult had. Lydia did not answer, but the silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt charged, waiting, as fate itself leaned closer. Beyond the glass, snow continued falling, indifferent, while inside Hawthorne's heirloom walls, a different future quietly began to breathe, unfinished, dangerous, tender, and impossible to ignore now, tonight, forever. Arabella arrived at Hawthorne Manor the following afternoon, unannounced yet expected, like a storm everyone smells before it breaks. Lydia stood at the base of the grand staircase when the doors opened to reveal her sister cloaked in winter white, cheeks flushed with triumph. She removed her gloves with unhurried elegance, eyes sweeping the hall until they landed on Lydia. For a heartbeat, amusement flared, bright, cruel, familiar. "I see you've made yourself quite at home," Arabella murmured, voice featherlight, yet sharpened to pierce. Lydia forced her breathing steady, knowing weakness would only invite deeper wounds from the one person who once shared her cradle. Alistair descended the staircase with the poise of a man carved into the architecture itself. His presence drew silence, commanding the attention Arabella seemed certain she deserved. When he reached Lydia's side, he rested a gloved hand at her back. Formal, protective, intentional. Arabella's smile tightened. She approached with a bow perfected over years of admiration. "Your Grace," she said, "I came to clarify misunderstandings. I fear the entire town believes you were deceived by circumstance." She glanced pointedly at Lydia. "I thought you should hear the truth from me." Alistair's expression did not shift, but the air sharpened. They moved to the drawing room, winter light slanting across crimson carpets. Arabella began with practiced grace, though venom threaded her every syllable. She spoke of the family's desperation, of Lydia's supposed obedience, of a marriage sealed under false pretenses. Yet as she spun her narrative, Lydia felt something unfamiliar rising within her. Not fear, but fatigue. She had carried the burden of blame long enough. When Arabella paused to breathe, Lydia stepped forward, voice trembling yet resolute. "I did not ask for this," she said, "but I will not apologize for trying to survive what was forced upon me." Arabella blinked, surprised by resistance she had never seen from her sister. Alistair's gaze flickered toward Lydia with something close to pride, though his face remained composed. Arabella recovered quickly. "Survival," she repeated with delicate mockery. "You are Duchess Hawthorne, a title meant for someone capable of bearing it. You may wear the gown, Lydia, but the world knows it was never yours." The words struck with precision. Lydia felt the sting, but she did not look away. For the first time, she realized Arabella needed her weakness as much as the air she breathed. Alistair rose slowly, every movement deliberate. "Enough," he said, voice low and controlled. Arabella stilled. "This marriage stands. Not by your family's doing, not by scandal, but by my choice." His gaze swept to Lydia. "My Duchess has shown integrity where others offer deceit." Arabella's lips parted in shock. The room held its breath. "If society questions her right to stand beside me," he continued, "they will answer to me directly." It was not a shout, not a threat. Only truth spoken with unshakable authority. Lydia felt warmth bloom through her chest, fragile yet fierce. Arabella laughed softly, brittle edges cracking through. "You cannot rewrite what people saw, Your Grace. You married the wrong twin." The words hung like smoke. Alistair approached her with a calm that chilled. "No," he replied. "I married the better one." Arabella stepped back, color draining from her cheeks. Lydia froze, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and wonder. Arabella's eyes flicked to her sister, accusing, wounded, furious. Lydia had expected that moment her entire life. Yet now it tasted different. Not victory, but release, like a cord snapping after years of tension. As Arabella departed in rigid silence, Alistair turned to Lydia. Her hands trembled as he offered a small velvet box, simple yet elegant. "This was commissioned the moment you entered the ballroom last night," he said. Lydia opened it with careful fingers. Inside lay a hairpin of hawthorn gold, crafted with delicate filigree, shaped like winter branches catching early frost. It was nothing like Arabella's ornate jewels. This one was made for her alone. Lydia's throat tightened. "I thought you deserved something that belongs to no one else," he murmured. She traced the cool metal, the gift fragile in her palm. "Why?" she whispered. Alistair met her gaze, something unguarded flickering beneath his control. "Because last night, I realized I had never truly looked at you. And when I did," he hesitated, rare uncertainty brushing his voice. "When I did not wish to look away." Lydia felt her heartbeat trip over itself, her breath catching like a tear suspended on its edge. The world softened around them, the air warm with possibility she scarcely dared to reach toward. Later, he guided her into the manuscript room, a place dim with centuries of Hawthorne history. Dusty volumes lined the walls, portraits watched from shadows, and the scent of old parchment filled the air. Alistair moved to a drawer and withdrew several sealed letters, edges frayed with time. "These were meant for your sister," he said quietly. "Letters written before I knew, before anything changed." Lydia braced herself, fearing pity, regret, comparison. Yet when he opened one, the ink revealed something different. Uncertainty, apprehension, a man struggling with expectations he had not chosen. He set the letters aside. "I do not want the past dictating the future," he said. "Not hers, not yours, and certainly not mine." Lydia stepped closer, the room shrinking into soft, fragile silence. His eyes held hers, steady, searching, vulnerable in a way she had never imagined. The air seemed to tremble between them. She swallowed. "Then what do you want, Your Grace?" The question slipped out, bare and trembling. For a long moment, he did not answer. He simply looked at her, as though committing something to memory, something delicate and dangerously precious. Finally, with a breath that seemed to shift the room itself, he whispered, "I wish I had met you first." The confession struck through her like light through stained glass, fragile, radiant, irrevocably tender. Lydia's breath broke, her heart swelling with equal parts ache and wonder. Before she could respond, a knock sounded at the door, urgent and unexpected. A footman bowed, eyes wide. "Your Graces, there has been a visitor requesting an audience. She insists it concerns the Duchess. She claims she carries a truth neither of you know." Alistair and Lydia exchanged a glance, uncertain, bracing, breathless, and the next moment changed everything. The visitor stood in the dim vestibule like a shadow torn from winter itself, her cloak damp with melting snow. Lydia felt a strange tightening in her chest as she approached, Alistair's steady presence just behind her. The woman lifted her face, revealing a maid from her childhood home. Martha, the one who had once bandaged her skinned knees, the one who used to whisper quiet comfort when the world overwhelmed her. Now her eyes were red, swollen with worry. "My lady," she breathed, dropping into a trembling curtsy. "I came as fast as I could. There are things you do not know, things your parents kept from you, secrets that must come to light before more harm is done." The corridor fell silent, thick as snowfall. Lydia exchanged a glance with Alastair, steady, protective, unreadable, before guiding the woman into a smaller sitting room lit by a single lamp. Martha clutched her cloak as though letting go might unravel her entirely. "Your Grace," she said, addressing Alastair with a shaky nod, "forgive my boldness, but I can no longer bear the burden. It concerns the switch, the morning of the wedding, and why they chose Lydia." Lydia stiffened. Part of her wanted to flee the room, to escape the ache of being reminded once more that she was never meant to stand at Alastair's side. Yet another part, bolstered by the warmth of the hairpin he had gifted her, steeled itself. She lowered into a seat, hands clasped, heartbeat echoing like a quiet plea inside her ribs. "Tell us," she said softly. Martha wrung her hands. "Your parents were drowning in debt. They had mortgaged the estate, borrowed against next year's harvest, and gambled on Arabella marrying well enough to save them. But Arabella," she paused, as though reluctant to speak ill. "She refused the match at the last moment. She claimed she would not be tied to a man she had never met. She left the house before dawn, leaving only a note. When they found it, your mother nearly collapsed. They panicked. They feared the Duke would withdraw his alliance and expose their desperation." Lydia felt the room tilt, as though the truth were tilting the floorboards beneath her. "She ran away?" she whispered. Martha nodded weakly. "Your mother begged you to take her place. She feared scandal, feared ruin, and she believed you would obey." Alastair inhaled sharply, jaw tightening, but he remained silent. Lydia stared at Martha, memories unwinding inside her. She remembered her mother's trembling hands fastening the gown, the forced smile, the hurried carriage ride. She had thought it duty. She had thought it desperation. She had never imagined Arabella had chosen her freedom without a second thought. Martha continued, voice cracking. "I knew it was wrong. I knew you would bear the shame they should have carried themselves. But they insisted, and I was too cowardly to stop them." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I beg your forgiveness, my lady." Lydia rose slowly, her movements soft yet decisive, like the first unfurling of a long-suppressed truth. She placed a gentle hand on Martha's trembling arm. "You should not have carried this alone," she said. "But the burden does not end with you. It ends now." The relief that washed over Martha's face was fragile, fleeting, yet profound. Lydia turned to Alastair, bracing for judgment, rejection, or worse, pity. But Alastair stepped toward her, the tension in his posture shifting into something fierce, protective. "You were forced into deception you never desired," he murmured. "None of this was your doing." His voice softened. "And nothing you have learned diminishes the woman you are." The words steadied her like hands on her shoulders. A long silence stretched between them, charged, intimate. Martha bowed deeply and left them, closing the door with reverent care. When they were alone, Lydia exhaled, raw and shaken. "I did not know," she whispered. "I never wished to steal anyone's life, least of all hers, and certainly not yours." Alastair caught her hands, gently but with unshakable certainty. "You stole nothing," he said. "The life we have, however it began, will not be defined by others' choices." His thumb brushed the back of her knuckles, sending a tremor through her. "What we build from here will be ours alone." Yet even as he spoke, Lydia's fears stirred. "But the world will see this as deception," she said softly. "And Arabella, she will not accept being replaced." Alastair's gaze hardened. "She replaced herself," he said, "and in doing so, revealed what she truly values." He stepped closer, voice lowering. "Lydia, I have spent my life surrounded by ambition, manipulation, and pretense. And yet the only person who has shown me honesty is the one who fears she has none. A shuddered breath escaped her. The warmth of his nearness, the sincerity in his tone, it all threatened to break something delicate inside her. "I do not know how to move forward," she murmured. "I do not know what I am meant to be." "You are meant," he said gently, "to be yourself." And the pause stretched between them, trembling. "I find myself wishing to know you, as no one else has." Before she could answer, the lamps flickered, shadows trembling along the walls. Wind howled against the windows, rattling the panes. The storm outside mirrored the storm gathering within them. Lydia stepped away instinctively, overwhelmed by the intensity in his eyes. But he followed her movement, not imposing, not demanding, simply present with a quiet gravity she could no longer deny. A sudden knock echoed through the corridor. A footman entered, bowing deeply before offering a sealed envelope. "Your Grace," he said, voice quivering. This was delivered with urgency. "It is from Lady Arabella." Lydia's pulse stumbled. Alistair broke the seal and read silently, his expression shifting from disbelief to something colder. "She accuses you of ensnaring me," he said, his voice low. "She claims she wishes to expose the family's deceit before the time. She threatens to bring the matter before Parliament itself." Lydia felt her breath catch. "She would ruin me," she whispered. Alistair looked up. "No," he said. "She will not." He crossed the room, kneeling beside her as though offering allegiance. "Lydia, I cannot promise an easy road, but I will not allow anyone, not even your sister, to cast you aside again." He rose, extending his hand, and for the first time, Lydia placed her hand in his without hesitating, feeling a warmth that felt like something beginning rather than breaking. The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the room in brief flashes. The manor seemed to inhale, preparing for what would come next. Alistair guided her toward the hearth, where the fire glowed like a jewel against the darkness. "Stay with me," he said softly, "not because duty binds you, but because you choose to." His words held no command, only hope, and Lydia felt the last fragile walls she clung to begin to yield. "I am afraid," she admitted. "So am I," he murmured, "yet I cannot unsee what I see now." He reached up, brushing a curl behind her ear with tender care. "You, Lydia Fairfax Hawthorne, are the one I should have met first." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of the ache that comes when a wounded heart finally finds shelter. The warmth of the fire cast soft gold across his face, and Lydia felt herself lean toward him as though drawn by gravity itself. The kiss, when it came, was not fiery or desperate. It was reverent, slow, fragile, trembling with everything they had endured. His lips met hers softly, a promise rather than a claim. Lydia felt the world fall away, leaving only the quiet miracle of being wanted, not instead of someone else, but as herself. When they finally parted, breath mingling in the warm glow of the fire, Alistair whispered, "Whatever storm she brings, we face it together." But before Lydia could answer, thunder shook the windows, and distant hooves thundered across the manor gates. A guard burst into the corridor outside, shouting for the Duke. Lydia turned toward the sound, heart pounding, as the guard's voice echoed through the hall. "Your Grace, Lady Arabella has returned, and she is not alone." The last embers of calm flickered out. The storm had arrived,